Everyone, I am so glad to see so many familiar faces, and I'm again surprised that this one is so much better attended than the first session, so that must be the right timing for this one. We've talked about on the last session around harnessing your energy, the things that you can do in your workplaces or in your homes in order to break that stress response. And so today's a little bit different. Sources of stress though. Give me a couple of the big things that you're facing. What are some of your big challenges? Anybody? Moving. Moving's a big one. Okay, good. What about work? Anything in particular with work? Is it people or is it processes? Deadlines. So too much to do, not enough time to do it in, trying to meet all those deadlines. Does that make sense? Okay, what else? Money. You have too much money and not enough ways of spending it, right? Of course it is. Okay. All those bills, the things that want to take our money away from us. What else? Family. Who said family? Over here? Good. What about family? Just having them? What's that? Family dynamics. Yeah, family is usually like one of two things. It's either family conflict, different ways of thinking about things, different ideas about what's important, or it's caregiving issues, isn't it? Being responsible for somebody else, making sure that their needs are met, that kind of stuff. So somebody waving over here. Health issues. And it may be our own health that we're facing, or it could be our children or our parents, or it could be even when a coworker goes off and now we have to figure out how we're going to get those things done, right? Good. Give me one more.
Age and changes.
What was that one?
Age and changes.
Age. Oh, how many of you feel like your body is doing things that you didn't expect that it was going to be doing? Moving in ways that you didn't expect that it was going to be moving or not be moving, all those kinds of wonderful things that happen. Some of the stressors that we face are things that are outside of ourselves. How many of you can relate to maybe a little bit of road rage? It may be road rage or shopping rage. How many of you actually stand in line and you see where it says 1 to 7 items and you're counting 1, 2, 2, there's 9 in there. Can they not count? There's 9. All right, so sometimes it's our perspective on those types of things that happen outside of us. Sometimes it's about things like we talked about, things happening with us. How many of you can relate to maybe some hormonal kinds of things that may be happening? All right, and one day all of a sudden you just feel like you just want to explode all over everybody. All right, so sometimes that's part of it. And then those other times where we don't like ourselves. Have you ever had one of those days in which like you're listening to yourself and you're thinking, even I can't stand my voice right now. Can't stand what I'm saying because you feel crabby or feel like it's, everything is negative. There's times when I think my son, he'll say, stop yelling. I'm like, I'm not yelling. Right? And so we kind of have those reactions. I like this, anybody recognize who this is? Jackie Robinson, absolutely. And so one of the things that that he says is we can't predict the curveballs that life throws our way. And so, all of those things that happen to us along the way. So here's my story for you. So I looked this up just for you for this particular thing. So I need to use my fingers for this. So my great-great-great-grandfather, I had to make sure I got all the right numbers in here. His name was William, moved to Canada in 1850. So it was around that particular time frame. He was from Hanover, and at that time there was a lot of unrest going in the country. He wanted to come to Canada to have a better life for his family. That was his goal. He knew there would be hardships, but he figured that this was the best decision for him. So he picked up his family. He moved to a place called Broadhagen, Ontario. Any idea where Broadhagen, Ontario is? Broadhagen is in between Stratford and Goderich. Little wee town. He purchased his land from the Canada Company, and he had a 10-year lease. So in that 10 years, he had to clear the land, build his house, and start producing crops because he only had 10 years to pay that lease back. So it was a very difficult time for them. But they were leaving a country that was full of turmoil, and they were coming for a better life. His son, Ludwig, as he grew up, joined him on the farm. So he had his wife, and he started his family, and they were farming as well. Now, one of the things that I didn't know about was that Ludwig lost most of his children in the Great Dying. Anybody know what the Great Dying was? The Great Dying happened in the 1870s, and that's when many people got diphtheria. And so he lost most of his children during that period of time. farming was never easy for them. They were always kind of hand-to-mouth existence, and they often had to borrow in order to get the seeds for the next year. In around the 1880s, one of the things that I also found out about the history at that time was that there was a great forest fire that went from the northern states all the way through Ontario. And many farmers during that time, many of those small communities were completely destroyed. He didn't lose his farm, but some of his neighbors did, and he was helping to support his neighbors during that time. I'm going to fast forward a little bit. And so, talking about when I was 10 years old. When I was 10 years old, my parents and I, we went for a drive. We were going to see my older cousin who was pitching softball in the Women's Canadian Championships in a town just not very far from us. And so we picked up, we drove there. My cousins were all there to cheer her on. And I came home with my cousins and my aunt and uncle in the car. And as we were driving down the road, we got closer to where our farm was, and we could see that there was smoke billowing. And as we got closer, we could see that the cars were parked on both sides of the road. There were fire trucks and hoses, and our barn was burning off to the side. My parents came home shortly after that. Somebody must have phoned them at the ballpark and told them to come home right away. And so they came in shortly behind us, and at 30 years of age, they had lost absolutely everything and had to start all over again. I'm going to forward one more time. I'm sitting in my office not that long ago, and I had a report that needed to be done. I only had an hour to get this report off because I had promised that it would be done. And I know I had been saving along the way, but my computer crashed, and I couldn't get it to come back up, and I couldn't remember how long ago it was since I had saved. And so I was sitting there, I was frustrated, trying to figure out how to get my computer back online again, similar to what you had talked about this morning. 3 different scenarios, 3 different kind of periods in our history. And I'm often asked, which generation experienced the most stress? And often we think of, the hardships of the previous generations compared to the hardships of now. And many of us are dealing with all kinds of things, but there's one thing that those 2 generations had that we don't necessarily have as much of today. And that's that sense of support, that sense of connection. William came with other people from his community to start a new community, and so they built together, they celebrated together, they supported each other when family members died. And then, my parents, there were hundreds of people that were lined up on both sides of the road that day to help them through, and hundreds of people who came together to help them rebuild that barn. But sometimes when we're sitting in our office and we're dealing with things, we feel like we're in it all alone. We feel like there's no one there to help us. There's no one that can answer our questions. And so when we kind of get caught in that, sometimes we feel like our stress levels are so high and there's nobody to be there to help us. So, Jackie Robinson says, we can't predict the curveballs that life throws our way, but we can determine how we step up to the plate. We can determine what skills are we going to bring that are going to help us through those situations. So some of you were in the session. Any new people who didn't attend Tuesday's class? Just a couple of people. Okay, so this is particularly for you. So I do ask lots of questions. You get to give me some answers. When you think about health, what comes to mind? What picture comes to mind, or what definition comes to mind for you?
It's a state of being that you have the energy to do things
Okay.
that you require.
Good. So a state of being that gives you energy to be able to do the things that you need to do. I like that. I like that. Anything else? What else comes to mind when you think of health?
And both mind and your physical.
Okay, so both mentally and physically. Good. What about for you?
I would say eating right is the number one thing when I think of health and how
Okay.
physical being, because that gives us strength for everything else.
Good. How we eat, our nutrition is paramount. And we hear a lot about nutrition, don't we? There's different diets and there's different philosophies and all of these things. So we do hear quite a bit about nutrition and energy, don't we? Anything else? Sleep. Sleep is kind of probably the second one on that list, isn't it? And so making sure that we're getting a good sleep is part of staying healthy.
Yes, and there's another one is social connection.
Good.
That can be a requirement of staying healthy.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Our ability to be connected is a huge part of this. We don't talk about it very much. There's not a lot of articles about it. There's not a lot of tips and strategies that are being promoted around it, but we are finding out more and more of how big of a piece that is. When I look at overall health, I'm talking about being able to live your life without feeling overwhelmed. That would be my really basic definition for health. It's being able to do the things that we want to do without feeling overwhelmed and frustrated, like we're behind the 8 ball, like we don't know what to do next. When we have the tools in our tool belt to help us to move forward. And so when we talk about resiliency, what do you think of when we talk about resiliency? What comes to mind?
To bend and not break.
To
bend to, you know, when you get pummeled with stuff and you can deal with it and move on.
Yeah, to bend and not break. That's a wonderful kind of metaphor for life, isn't it? Because lots of things are going to try to knock us over. Lots of things are going to be in our path. And they're going to be big challenges. They're going to be little challenges. They're going to be annoying things that get under our skin. And all of these things kind of keep taking their toll on us. But we keep going. We keep standing tall. We don't break. We don't bust. We're able to kind of flourish in that way. Anybody else? Going with the flow. Not letting it kind of set us back. We may get set back a little bit, but not so far that we can't keep moving forward. And for me, it's about that ability to move forward, to keep going, to get through the challenges and kind of come out on the other side. We may not be the same on the other side. Hopefully we're stronger. Hopefully we know a little bit more. Hopefully we have a few more tools in our tool belt, but we come out on that other side. And so for me, kind of that picture that I keep of something, of a time when we're probably the most resilient is when we're learning how to talk and when we're learning how to walk. You know, that's a time when you see kind of pure joy in that. You know, the child falls down, they bump their head, they get a bonk on the head or a bump and it's kissed better, and even though they cry, they keep moving forward. They keep learning how to walk. And so they do that with that sense of humor and strength and spirit that goes along with being resilient. I like when we talk about resiliency because it's not just about building tools in a tool belt. Those are stress management tools. But resiliency is more than that. Resiliency is being able to take all of those life experiences and move ourselves forward, to be able to live a full and flourishing life, one that we can look back on and say, yeah, I did the things that I wanted to do. I responded the way that I needed to be able to live the life I wanted. All right. So SOS principle. How many of you remember the SOS principle that we talked about? Gratitude is one of them. So gratitude is part of the O. Perfect. So what does the first S stand for in situation? Perfect. How do we deal with the situation? What are the problem-solving skills that I'm going to use that are going to help me to deal with that challenge? How am I going to break it down into smaller pieces? What's my to-do list look like? What am I going to do to simplify things or to be able to meet that challenge in some way? Now, the O is the big one. The O is what we talked about last time. So what does the O stand for? Ourself. Good. And it's about giving ourselves a break, and it's also about taking care of ourselves. So eating right and sleeping right and exercise and being able to have hobbies and find things that are going to take our mind off of the source of stress. As you mentioned, the biggest one is the last S. And what does the last S stand for? Support. And so we don't talk about it as much. We don't hear as much about it, but we need to be able to figure out how many tools can we put in our tool belt, because we need just as many tools for dealing with a situation and taking care of ourselves and support in order to do the very best that we can. If all we have are tools to take care of the situation and to take care of ourselves, but we have no support tools, we're not doing our very best. And that's when people do feel isolated. That's when we see higher rates of depression. And so we need to be able to build that just as much. All right. Was there a question? Nope. Okay. So I want you to turn to page 10 in your booklets. Page 10 in your booklets talks about how resilient are you. So let's look at some of the skills and that are available already to us. So on page 10, page 11, I want you to go through and rate yourself on these. So the first one says, I enjoy what I'm doing. If you enjoy what you're doing, you're going to give yourself a 5. You strongly agree with that statement, or it may be a 1 where you strongly disagree, or somewhere in between. So go through rating yourself on how you see yourself in relationships to those statements. Anybody need a pen? I have several. Hang on here. We'll find some more. All right. There you go. You'll catch? I can't be guaranteed that I'm actually going to throw it to the right spot. My baseball skills are long past. There you go.
No, I just have one for her.
Oh.
Just one, thank you.
Oh, just one? Oh, you have one? Okay. Oh, over here. There we go. You're welcome. Check this one out. I'm not sure if it works or not. Okay. And if it doesn't, I have another one here. Does it right? Perfect. Good. Yes.
The 70s are all gone. Yeah. I got 75, so where do I fall in?
Did I miss something on there?
Oh, there's a space between 69 and 80.
There is. Good point. I
60 to 79 rather than 69.
yeah, it should be 79. That's yeah.
And then that covers everything.
It's 70 to 79 is missing.
Yeah. So, but that category, that category is going to change from 60 to 79. It's a big category, yes.
So go into that category then?
Yes. Thank you. What's that?
Just a typo.
Typo. All right. So as you kind of work through that quiz, you'll see that there's different skills involved in resiliency. And so most of those skills come under what was called the Robertson-Cooper model. So if you turn to the next page, on page 13, you're going to see the Robertson-Cooper model. And it talks about resiliency is actually made up of different areas. So you're going to see that some of those things are involved around confidence. How confident are you in dealing with your life, in dealing with certain situations, in dealing with certain challenges? What's your purpose? Do you have a vision for why you're doing the things that you're doing, and how clear are you on that purpose? How adaptable are you? How are you able to pull out the skills that you need to use in different situations? Or do you only have one or two skills that you try to use over and over again, but they're not appropriate in different situations? And then the last one is social support. And again, finding that the biggest impact on resilience out of all of those is social support. And how do we build that up, and how do we utilize that? We know that stress motivates our fight and flight response. Most of you have heard of your fight and flight response, either to attack, kill the beast and eat it for dinner, or to run like heck so that you didn't become part of its dinner, right? That's our fight and flight response. But for many of us, it's not necessarily just about fighting, or it's not just about running away, but it can be just even, talking about, being a little more sarcastic, being a little bit edgier, being a little bit more rough around the edges when it comes to communication. How many of you can see where, when you're stressed out, it impacts your relationships? Let's start with your partners. How many of you can see where it impacts your relationship with your partners or your family? Absolutely. Where it can impact even when you're at work. How many of you get a little bit edgier at work? Maybe don't use the social niceties in the same way. Yet, we don't want the people around us to know that we're stressed out, because there's a lot of guilt and shame and stigma associated with mental health issues. We don't want anybody to know, but sometimes we show them in the way that we're responding to things. And so we know that the stress, fight and flight response can be evoked, but there's something that's really cool that we often don't talk about, is that we also have just as strong and just as prominent, that's part of our stress response. It's called the tend and befriend response. It's the tend and befriend. It's our instinct to protect the tribe. So fight and flight is our instinct to protect ourselves, right? To keep ourselves safe in dangerous situations. But that tendency to protect the tribe is about, taking care and making sure that they survive and thrive. How many of you heard of those stories where a mom is able to lift a car off of a child that's been trapped? Yeah. Even if it's a dangerous situation, or somebody who runs into a burning building to save somebody at the risk of their own life. If we only went by the thought that fight and flight was the predominant response, nobody would ever run into that building. It's all about protecting me, making sure I thrive. But we know that we are much more altruistic than that it's about bringing people together. It's about protecting the family. And so I love this picture. It's that whole sense of hugging. Now, when I was looking at different information and research that's happening on this, even something as simple as hearing your mom's voice can lower your stress. Having a phone call with a family member, getting a hug from your mom. Now, some of us, I drove my son into his first year experience for university. They were having a day today, and I'm pretty sure that if I would have told him that on the way here, he would have opted for somebody else's mom. Because I don't think I was decreasing his stress level this morning as I was talking to him. But it's that sense of just being connected, and it starts off with the bond between a mother and a child, but it's so much more than that. It's our bond with the tribe that we grow up with, that we live with, that we work with. We know that couples who hug at the end of the day have lower blood pressure than those that don't. We know that couples that still kiss are 8 times less likely to be impacted by stress. So it's not just social connectedness out there, it's one-on-one connectedness as well, our relationships.
I saw once in a grocery store, I used to do some work on weekends in a grocery store, the typical kid having the meltdown in the grocery store, on the floor, screaming away, hands and feet going, and the father's just standing there, oh my God, get it, if that was my kid, I'd have run her around. And he just kind of stood around, and the kid finally finished, and then he kind of, wiped his face, got up, and the dad says, I think you need a hug. Gives him a hug. The kid absolutely melted. It was like, psh, it was gone.
Absolutely.
I would have done the very opposite.
I know.
I would have grabbed that kid out and, plugged him in a car and drove off in a huff.
In a huff, yeah, and part of that's embarrassment and.
Diffuse this kid, just absolutely diffused him.
Don't you like when that happens, when somebody thinks much more rationally than we do? And you think, wow, I wish I could do that, but at the moment, it's just not happening. It's just not there. But we know that. We know that when somebody's stressed out up here, they can't hear what you're saying. They can't think. They can't problem solve. And he knew that. He knew that he just had to wait for the energy to be expended, and that a hug could make it better. And it is that connection. It's that safety piece that we need, and it's about being part of that tribe. So that tend and befriend, it is those selfless acts. It's those people who reach out to somebody else, who provide for somebody else, who care for somebody else, who support somebody else, who problem solve for somebody else. You know, those kinds of acts help to bond us together. But what we know is that it increases our hope and it increases our courage. And at the same time, it decreases our sense of fear. So being connected to people does such a wonderful thing. Not only is it releasing, you know, oxytocin, like in that mother-child kind of relationship, it does even in other relationships. Even just, you know, sitting beside your friends in a presentation releases oxytocin, releases that sense of being connected to other people. That sense of courage. I love the fact that, you know, being with other people makes us braver. It helps us to rely on our intuition. It makes us more motivated. And like I said, it helps to decrease the fears in those situations. We're faced with all kinds of unknowns, aren't we? How to get the computer running, to, you know, what's the future going to be like, and, you know, what's going to happen as interest rates go up. But I mean, there's so many different things that are the unknowns that are out there, but it's our tribe and that connectedness that can give us the motivation and the inspiration to be able to keep going. But it's not just, you know, that occupation or family. It happens at work too, and I think sometimes we forget that there's that mindset of connectedness that can happen in our workplaces as well. We know that people who are connected at work have a lower rate of burnout and are more engaged in the jobs that they're doing, and so we can find ways of being able to build that. Page 14 in your booklets, please. So we're talking about social support at work. I want you to go through thinking about the teams that you're working with now and rate them. So page 14, employees enjoy being together. If you agree with that statement, give it a true. If you disagree, give it a false. And just go through and see how you would rate those particular statements. All right, thinking about your smaller work team to your bigger work team to the association all the way through the university, I want you to think about those work teams. How do you build social support within your work teams? What are some of the things that you do to show your social support to each other? Yeah. Good. Yeah, she gives you that extra prod to get going and get work, or, you know, go for that walk. And I like that. That's two parts, right? It's the social connected piece that goes with it, and it's also the physical kind of getting up, getting moving, getting our bodies with the harnessing energy that we talked about the other day. Like that one. What else do you do to show social support with each other?
Celebrate each other's birthdays.
Each other's birthdays, perfect. And so do you bring in cakes and balloons and things?
Usually there's a cake, and we might even, if there's time, we might take the person out for lunch.
Nice. Okay, so you go out for lunch or you have cake. Again, anything social that's surrounding food seems to be a big treat, right? What else do you do? Good. In team kind of meeting kinds of things, or just one-on-ones? How do you manage that? One-on-one. So you feel comfortable enough going to your kind of coworker and saying, "Hey, this is what I'm dealing with." Perfect. Good.
We tell stories to each other about our lives because that connects you even more because it's not just about work.
That's right.
Just little things what you did on the weekend could
Yeah, because we're not just separate, are we? We bring our home life and our personal life, and everything meshes together, and that's the way it should be. But you know, if there's challenges, again, it's learning from each other. So it's not just asking for help about work things, but I can learn from your stories. I can learn from the way that you celebrated. I can learn from the way that you overcame a challenge. And those help me, and it also allows me to be able to connect with you. You're not just a number or a colleague over here. Now, I'm not suggesting that you need to be best friends with everybody, but you do need to know a little bit about what makes each other tick, what's important to each other, and maybe some of the challenges that they're facing, because that allows us to be able to put in a little bit of, or give them a little bit of slack, right? If things aren't, if they don't use the social niceties, if they're not always saying pleases and thank yous. What else do you do? Any other kind of strategies you use to stay connected?
We don't do it much anymore, but we used to in the past get the okay from the chair of the department. We'd use a vacation day and go out and do something.
Ah.
Like we spend a day out somewhere.
Good, as a group.
We went to, as many as could make it, like we went to the islands, we went to Rom,
Nice.
different events like that. But I must say it's kind of fallen off the last few years. So.
Okay. So maybe something to implement once in a while, just to see if there's interest again. Sometimes getting outside of work gives people a more human face too, doesn't it? You get to see them when they're not trying to put on that professional, or maybe where they're more reserved than when they're outside.
Sharing quotes that you might like.
Oh, good.
I sent an email on simple formulas of life, so a list of things that, simple things that
Good.
you can do to live within your means or whatever. So something that might make you laugh or you might enjoy, you share it with your team.
Perfect. I like that. It puts life into perspective. It also may give some people some tools, but then you get to start to have a shared sense of humor around things, or shared experience around things. Yeah, absolutely.
Plus, we encourage each other. Like today, they encouraged me to come here.
Good.
So that
Thank you.
we need to learn more, and then, as a team, we build up a little bond.
Absolutely. Yeah, when we learn together, or when we get tools that we can build together, they can say to you, you know that this is important, so we need to do this, because we're all in the same presentation together. So that sense of support is really, really important. On page 15, social connectedness is not only about emotionally connecting to each other, so that, being able to understand each other a little bit more. It's also direct help, like you said, asking for help. Maybe somebody can pitch in, or you can pitch in and help somebody else when they're struggling. And also information, things that they may not know, or experiences that you may have, that you can give them information so that they can learn from it. So think of all of the different ways that you can build that support up, especially when you have new members coming in who may not have your same sense of history. Or when somebody is leaving and they're going to a new team, and the apprehension that they may be feeling, giving them that support and suggestions of how they can be successful that way. On the bottom of page 15, I'm a huge proponent of saying please and thank you. And I often look at the way people come into a building. Are people holding the doors for each other? Are they saying those pleases and thank yous? Because that really speaks a lot about the environment that people are working in. So sometimes we minimize the social niceties when we get stressed out. That's even more important that we're using them, because people need to feel that connectedness. I love the fact that you brought up stories, because I think stories are a really big thing. How we share, how we've done, how we've accomplished. And then make use of your other resources. Your HR department, your EAP program, the association itself can answer questions and things for you. Make sure you use the community resources that are available, so that you don't feel like you're always doing it by yourself, that you've got somebody else that can support you and answer your questions. One of the big things as a team, and this can be a family team and this can be a work team, but when you have a sense of purpose, that you're working to a bigger than self goal. When we as a team are doing this, whatever this is, our job, in order to do this, when we have that sense of vision of what the bigger this is, we're more engaged, there's less burnout, and we have more connectedness to each other. So be really clear on what's the purpose, what's the passion, what's the end result that we're aiming for, and when we can build that in. How many of you have watched the Survivor shows and all those other kinds? It's that sense of purpose, isn't it? They're coming together in order to kind of have that sense of purpose. are bigger than self goals. Any of you, as either as a family team or in your community or associations or even in work, volunteered for anything? Like volunteered to build a home for, or, Habitat for Humanity, or to do a run, or to do a walk, or to raise money, or those types of things. That's another sense of shared purpose, isn't it? Whenever we are kind of pulling together, but even raising money or helping people who are less fortunate than us, that sense of being connected to the larger society helps to relieve our stress. It helps to lower that stress level when we feel more engaged that way. So think of those types of things for yourself and for your teams. We're going to switch it up a little bit because we've talked a little bit about work, but I also want to talk about caregiving, because many of us are in that caregiving sandwich. How many of you are in that, where you're looking after children? They may be teenagers or adult children, and you're looking after elderly parents or starting to look after elderly parents. Yeah, and that's a kind of a tough place to be. And you may not be in full caregiving mode, but you may where they're asking you more for your opinion, or where you're starting to have to look at financial decisions on their behalf, and feeling like you're being torn in so many different directions over and over again. When we talk about caregiving stress, it's the mental and physical exhaustion that we're talking about, where we're giving and giving and giving. One of the quotes that I really like says, "How thin can I spread myself before I no longer exist?" And for many of us, that speaks volumes about our life, doesn't it? We give it to work, and we give it to our children, and we're giving it to our parents, and we're giving it to our spouse, and we're giving it to our community. We may not be putting a lot of time and effort into ourselves. And so caregiving stress is really about you're putting so much out, not necessarily getting that support back. And so it's not about not doing it, but it's doing it in a way that you're going to elicit that support. Because we can't necessarily change the caregiving part, but what we can do is change the support part. And that goes a long way to decreasing that stress. So we want to get into a mindset of connection. That mindset of connection is, how can I bring other people on board? How can I ask for help? What resources are available to me in the community? Who's there to support me? Even something as simple as just a date night, getting away from family and being out with your partner, or going out to a movie with some friends just to laugh and have fun. So those types of things can help to decrease the stress around that. It's really easy to shut down and to burn out, and the biggest way around combating that is being connected to the people around you. Page 16 in your booklets. I'm going to ask the questions, and I want you to write down a name beside each of these. All right, so page 16. Who would you go to if you had a problem that you wanted to talk about? Write down a name or a couple of names. Oh, just write it right beside it, okay? I want you to kind of take a tally of some of the different names. Who would you talk to if you were confused about making plans for the future? Who would you see if you wanted to go to a movie, a concert, or share an interest or a hobby? Who would you seek out if you were feeling lonely or depressed? Who would be the first person you would turn to in a crisis situation? Who would be the first person that you would share your successes with? Something good happened. Who would you turn to? And who would you go to when you wanted to vent or blow off steam? Who would you let it all hang out with? Okay, so look at those names. Are you overwhelmed? I mean, one or two people on that list. Yeah, you have the same name kind of over and over again? Yeah. And so we need to be careful because, as I said, a time when you used to have a lot of friends, you could rely on a lot of people for different parts of your life, but as that social network gets smaller and smaller, we may start to rely only on one or two people. And if something happens to that person, you have nobody to fall back on. And so we need to make sure that social connection, that social circle around us is not getting too small. All right, so we talked about work, we've talked about caregiving, but social connection is not just about people. So this is my pet, this is my Misty right now. How many of you have pets that are part of your family? And so it is about connection. It's about looking after somebody else. In the same way children can be part of that social connection. We know that when people have pets, it lowers their blood pressure. And that's why we take pets into nursing homes, right? It's about being connected. It's about being responsible for somebody else and having that person or that animal being relying on you. And so how do we get connected? It's also about spirituality. It doesn't need to be a formal religious belief, but it can be that belief that you have a purpose in the world and that the world has a purpose. And we know that people who believe that are more socially connected. They have that sense of that things are going to be okay, that belief that everything will be all right. And so we know that they have a lower amount of stress because of that belief. And so looking at the ways that we get connected to the world around us. So what do you do? What do you do with all of this information? How do you put your plan together? In the same way that you put your energy strategies in place, you evaluate your support strategies. And sometimes we've got lots of supports, and then sometimes we find that we don't have very many. And so evaluating them, adding them in, looking for ways of giving support, and looking for ways of receiving that support. That S is as critical as the other two areas. Now, I'm going to wrap up with a quick story. How many of you remember the story about the Velveteen Rabbit? Anybody read the story of the Velveteen Rabbit? It's a great story. If you haven't had a chance to read that, I'd highly recommend it. But in my family, we didn't have a Velveteen Rabbit. We had a Velveteen Sheepy. And so this is my Nick with his Sheepy. Sheepy had hair missing from everywhere. The ears have been sewn back on a couple of times. The Velveteen Rabbit was loved by a little boy, and he was loved to the point that he was worn out. And so one day he asked, "What does it mean to be real?" And the sage advice that came to him said that being real is something that happens to you when someone really loves you. I thought, isn't that cool? That being real is when somebody loves you. And he said, "Does it hurt?" And they said, "Sometimes, but when you're real, you don't mind because the strength that you receive in return is worth it." Our social connection, our connection to the people around us, that tend and befriend response is what keeps us healthy, what keeps us resilient, and what allows us to be able to flourish and live that full life. And so as you kind of put these plans together and we talk about stress management, I want you to think about, where does that S fit in for you? Is it well evolved, or do you need to spend a little bit more time on it? I want to thank you so much for your time and energy and for coming out today. I'm so glad that that you took the time out of your schedules to do that, and especially those of you that came out with friends. That speaks volumes. If you have questions, come on up and ask me. I'm going to stick around. There's no such thing as a workshop without a workshop evaluation, so fill out the evaluation form. Let me know what you liked, what you didn't like. And if there's anything that I can do to support you, please let me know that as well. Have a wonderful afternoon, everyone.